It's the Matt Sager Podcast, Monday, March 25th of 2019. Big news day today. Wow, where to even begin? All right, why don't we start off with Zack Snyder? And I know what you're thinking.
Why did you say that name?
I know, couldn't be helped. He just had to give his hot take. I would advise that maybe Zack Snyder abstain from giving hot takes, especially about some of his more controversial work. Because, right now, I'm so inclined to sympathize with and empathize with and, feel for the guy. When he left Justice League, two things happened. One was that the DC Extended Universe was in crisis. Every decision made with him in the creative director's chair was more calamitous than the next, and the projections for the future were dismal and bleak, not only in terms of the kind of content that Snyder is capable of producing, which is all just darkness for darkness' sake, but genuine doom and gloom. It's one thing to be a nihilist, yet another to be an objectivist. But he's working for a massive corporation. He's working for Warner's, which owns DC, that really needs to catch up with Marvel desperately. And with Zack Snyder as the creative head of the DC Extended Universe and the director of Justice League and the Superman films, it was a terrible match. That had become very clear. Even films that he did not direct, but that he simply had a hand in as overseer, like Suicide Squad. It was a disaster. But the other thing that happened is heartbreaking. There was a real tragedy in his life. And so I, for instance, one of his most vicious critics during his run as director of Man of Steel, which I loathed, Batman vs. Superman, which, let's be honest, was just shit. There's nothing redeeming in that film. And Justice League, which, look, he directed much of it. Joss Whedon came in and directed at the end. I don't know how much corporate meddling he had to deal with, but at the end of the day, if you're the director, it's your responsibility if your movie sucks. And so Whedon shares some of that blame of Justice League being so terrible. But look at what's happened to DC since Snyder left. Again, under a dark cloud of personal tragedy, which I would not wish on him nor anyone, not my worst enemy. And I don't know Snyder. But it is an interesting time we're in which criticism is met with such disdain. Where possible, people politicize stuff. And it doesn't help that many reviewers are these snarky, hyper-politicized, weird right-wingers with, more often than not, some kind of agenda. With Snyder's movies at DC, I think we were all universal in our disdain for them. But again, with him gone and the DC Extended Universe clearly on an upward incline, Aquaman having done very well at the box office and critically, Shazam poised to do even more so, and a lighter tone, because comics actually are kind of silly. And yes, they should be for adults, but kids should be able to go? Really? There is a happy medium between this bleak, why did you say that name? Craziness and ridiculousness, which Shazam seems to be all about. But yeah, comic book films ought to be capable of levity. Zack Snyder was not capable of levity in any of his films. And again, in thinking of his tenure, I always like to think of The Watchmen, the movie that got him in the door, the movie that he actually pulled off with some real skill, and the movie that was almost faithful to the source material. It was the closest I've ever seen anyone come to nailing the source material from an Alan Moore comic adaptation. Now, granted, that's not saying an awful lot. From Hell, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, it's not as though there's a huge library backlog of these wonderful Alan Moore adaptations. But he did pretty well. As a guy who knows way too much about the story and the story behind the story and all the inside baseball of it, I can say about The Watchmen that he kind of missed the point. And surprisingly, it barely harms the movie at all. It just means that some characters, which you're meant to loathe, come off as strangely you're meant to like them, and you're not quite sure why, because they're giant assholes. And that is because one of Watchmen's themes, if not the predominant theme, was about objectivism and sort of crypto-fascism making its way into comics. Certainly the very violent form of objectivism practiced by Rorschach and the Comedian came through the pages of Steve Ditko's books, nothing he did while at Marvel, but stuff that he self-published, like Mr. A, and comics which he'd published at Charlton, which DC had right before Watchmen was published. They'd purchased all those characters. So Moore pitched it to be a book about Blue Beetle, Peacemaker, Judo Master, I think, all these Charlton characters who have clear analogs in what he instead ended up using, these original characters, the Watchmen. Because DC was like, we kind of want to, we're doing this whole Crisis on Infinite Earths thing, and we want to take all these properties which we bought and having it integrated into our comics and start doing that. So yeah, we can't have you have them all go crazy. And I'm not going to spoil The Watchmen, but we need our characters to be heroes and we need them to be alive. So no, create your own Watchmen universe. But having said that, Snyder is himself very much an objectivist, an avowed objectivist. I'm going to avoid boring you with the details of it. It's a philosophy that was founded by a woman named Ayn Rand, an author. Her big books were, there was The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, A lot of people on the right side of politics, not the correct side, I mean right-wingers, are big fans of Ayn Rand. Every teenage boy at one point, in my experience, goes through an Ayn Rand phase. When you're like, yeah, fuck the world, man. No one understands my genius. And, I'm so much smarter. I don't deserve this bullshit I get at work. I should just go, set up an island where I can only be with people who agree with me. And anything else is being a slave to the system, man. And in a much less cool way than that. Not that that came off as very cool. But in a really unhip way, with these sort of frumpy outfits and this stern, why would I pray to Jesus when I could just pray to my own pocketbook? Like super unpleasant Eastern European style. She won over a lot of people. For instance, Paul Ryan, Rand Paul. Objectivism is the belief that A is A and B is B, which sounds simple enough, but really what it means is if you feel you deserve a raise at work and you don't get it, you leave, full stop. If you see someone do something that is against your moral code, you use your full force, power, be it political or physical, to make matters right. And you must be the ultimate arbiter of what is right. Basically, trust no one, keep everything for yourself, greed is good, screw everyone, screw religion, something many objectivists of today seem to forget. That was a huge part of Ayn Rand's general philosophy on the world, that there is no God and you have to be your own God. Whatever that means. I'm an agnostic myself, but it always struck me kind of creepy. But as to Snyder, this is from Comic Book Resources. There was a 3-day charity event where they screened Dawn of the Dead, Watchmen, and Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition. Oh, it's exhausting. How is this lost on Snyder? That he's got to have an ultimate cut, for all those scenes that were just just to get that soundbite of, why did you say that name? Meant rewatching just a bit of one scene from Batman vs. Superman. And it's astonishing how bad that movie is. I mean, under closer scrutiny, there are a lot of things that don't hold up to repeat viewing. But then there are things that were terrible the first time and that the second time, when you're able to pay a little bit more attention to detail, you're just horrified. That's how I feel about Batman vs. Superman. But so Snyder had a Q&A panel. There's a video of this on Reddit. I'll post a link to it in the description for tonight's podcast. And Snyder, very maturely, like the adult that he is, described why his version of Batman killed. Someone says to me, Batman killed a guy. I'm like, fuck, really? Wake the fuck up. Wow, okay, maybe not so measured a response. Let's see. Snyder continued by referencing Watchmen, which was not screened at this movie and does not star Batman, but okay. He referenced Watchmen and its more mature story, saying, quote, once you've lost your virginity to this fucking movie, what? And then you come and say to me something about, my superhero wouldn't do that. I'm like, are you serious? I'm down the fucking road on that. Okay. It's a cool point of view to be like, my heroes are still innocent. My heroes didn't fucking lie to America. My heroes didn't embezzle money from their corporations. My heroes didn't commit any atrocities. Yeah, yes, I stand with that philosophy, Mr. Snyder. That's cool, but you're living in a fucking dream world. Well, it is superheroes, you lunatic. What is wrong with him? This on a weekend, all I'll say for Zack Snyder is he's damn lucky that Barbara Streisand opened her mouth and said something really horrifying this weekend, as did Diana Ross. But, wow. I'll be honest, Zack Snyder looks quite heroic next to Streisand, who came off like a gigantic ghoul, as did Diana Ross. Both leaping to the defense of Michael Jackson, Streisand somehow managing to really be the worst of the two. Diana Ross just sort of wants us to pretend that the allegations never happened and that there's no truth to the awful stories these grown-up former kids who were abused by Jackson had to tell on the documentary, Leaving Neverland. So she tweets, "Stop in the name of love," regarding Michael Jackson. Hey, remember that song I did? Now every time you hear it, you're going to think about young children having their innocence ripped from them by this monster. So, well done. As to Barbara Streisand, she said something just shocking. She did an interview with The Times. It was published on Friday. And she says she believes that they were molested. These two grown-ups who narrate their childhood being groomed and tortured by Michael Jackson for molestation. She says about Jackson that his, quote, sexual needs were his sexual needs, coming from whatever childhood he has or whatever DNA he has. You can say molested, but those children, as you heard them say, they were thrilled to be there. They both married and they both have children, so it didn't kill them. That should not be the determining factor in whether something was horrific. We shouldn't need for someone to be dead in order to validate their torture they had in life. What an unbelievably stupid, tone-deaf thing to say. And I've got to say, by contrast, at least with Batman, we're talking about a fictional character. But I would say that Snyder really definitively proved to the world that he was never going to get better, that his movies were garbage for the reasons that they were, which is that he was pig-headed, would not listen to reason or collaborators, and was going to see his his dark vision of these characters through. So he doesn't play well with others. He doesn't understand the concept of playing with other people's toys. A big franchise under a large corporate umbrella should have never brought in someone like him. When he's passionate about a project, it shows. And while I really don't like his vision, I admire his dedication to it. But you've got to have a response other than fuck this and fuck that and I fucking kill everybody and you're going to lose your virginity to my movie. When you're the auteur, and the studio and the distribution and everything else is done through you, do whatever you want. But you can't ever take a character like Batman, who is designed to appeal to people from all walks of life, ages 6 through 85, who is a huge symbol, not only of various values, but of this enduring mythology that Snyder just tromped through very sloppily and ham-handedly. And the idea that, oh, it's all fine because as long as it's dark, it's serious. And the thing is, the darkness was never my problem with Zack Snyder's DC movies. Batman killing, I do have a problem with because it's at odds with the character. Anyone who understood Batman knows that, generally speaking, if you're not adapting literally The Dark Knight Returns. And even then, the joke in the book was rubber bullets, I promise. Batman doesn't kill. I'm not saying that because I'm immature. Not saying that because I want more kids in seats in the theaters. I'm saying it because Batman doesn't kill. It's kind of his whole thing. If you would read even a single book by any of the creators who've worked on the character, he just doesn't. Talk to anyone in editorial. How those decisions weren't met with corporate interference is astonishing to me. And maybe he really did find himself at loggerheads with the brass at DC and Warner Brothers, and maybe that's why his movies ended up being so terrible. But I would say that Snyder should save his hot takes for literally any other subject. Thanks as always for listening to the Matt Sager podcast. Tomorrow I'm going to do a big breakdown on what was a huge news day for Apple. They're launching a game subscription service, a major new streaming service, this whole news ecosystem that's going to integrate magazines and stuff, and the Apple credit card. So I'm still taking all this in, getting ready to summarize it, and upgrading my iOS devices so I can take some of these services, like the news, for instance, for a spin. So that's tomorrow's show. In the meantime, why don't you get in touch with me? You can email matt@mattsager.com. or call me at 646-535-4788. You can also get me on Twitter, where I'm at Matt Sager. On Instagram, I'm Real Matt Sager. And on Facebook, well, my personal page is The Matt Sager. My voiceover page is Matt Sager VO. And this podcast page is facebook.com/Matt Sager Podcast. Also in tonight's podcast description, you'll find some links. There's my Patreon, patreon.com/Matt Sager. And you'll also find a link to my merch store. There's very cool Matt Sager podcast merch from wehavemerch.com. There's t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, and stickers. For everything else, my voiceover reels, contact information, blog posts and articles, even back episodes of this very podcast you're listening to right now. You can find that and more at my website, mattsagervoiceover.com.